1 week before my son's wedding, I drove to Hartwell Manor to check the centerpieces. That's how ordinary it started. Not some grand premonition, not a chill down my spine. I was a 64-year-old woman with a clipboard and a list of 12 things that needed to be confirmed before Saturday. The hydrangeas, the chair sashes, the lighting rigs in the East Ballroom. Belmore Event Design had been doing weddings at Hartwell for 11 years. I knew every corridor, every storage closet, every temperamental light switch. Fiona found me in the hallway outside the bridal suite. She'd been my lead coordinator for 22 years. She knew how I walked, how I thought, how I held my pen when something was bothering me. So when she appeared around the corner with that look on her face, tight jaw, eyes too wide, I stopped immediately. "Fiona, what's wrong?" She didn't answer. She took my arm the way you take someone's arm when there's no time to explain, and she pulled me backward down the hall to the old supply room beside the service elevator. She pushed me inside. The room smelled like cleaning solution and stacked linen. She shut the door and pressed her back against it. "Don't make a sound," she whispered. "Just listen." I could hear voices through the wall. The adjacent sitting room shared a thin partition. Old construction, 1930s building. Sound traveled. I'd known that for years. My son's voice came first, Reed, 36 years old, the boy I'd raised alone after Leonard died. "She'll sign it at the reception, right after the first dance. I'll have Rupert bring it over with the champagne toast." Then a woman's voice, Jillian, my future daughter-in-law, and the parish assessment. "When does that go in?" Monday morning. A third voice. Trent, Jillian's brother. Smoother than Reed, the kind of smooth that costs people money. Once it's on record, the succession transfer activates automatically. The trust moves within 72 hours. And the sale to Whitfield Group? Closes Thursday. $10 million, all of it into the Cayman account. By Friday, we're done. I put my hand over my mouth. Reed again, quieter. "She's going to be okay, right? The placement." "Maple Ridge is beautiful," Jillian said quickly. "She'll have her own room. She'll be comfortable." Fiona's hand found mine in the dark and held on. I stood there and let it settle. My son, my company, a placement I'd known nothing about. $10 million. Everything Leonard and I had built across 31 years, being moved off shores before I could draw breath to stop it. I waited until the voices moved away. A door opened, then closed. Silence. Fiona turned on the light. Her eyes were red at the edges. "They were here Thursday too," she said. "Same room. I heard your name, and I didn't know if I'd heard right, so I waited. I had to be sure." She pressed a hand to her sternum. "I'm so sorry, Mavis." "Don't be." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Did you record any of it?" She pulled out her phone. She'd started the recording 8 minutes in. I took the phone, listened to 30 seconds, and handed it back. "Send that to yourself and to me. Don't tell anyone else." I picked up my clipboard from where I'd dropped it on a shelf of folded napkins. I walked out of the supply room, down the hall, through the lobby, and out to the parking lot. I found my car. I sat in the driver's seat and set the clipboard on the passenger seat. The hydrangeas could wait. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the afternoon light to shift. Long enough for a couple to walk past the car laughing, on their way inside for someone else's joyful occasion. I watched and thought, a week ago I was that woman. I thought I was planning a wedding. I thought about Leonard. He died 8 years ago. Cardiac arrest, 61 years old, sitting at his own desk in the office we'd built together on Carver Street. We'd started Belmore Event Design in the spare bedroom of our first house. 2 folding tables, a fax machine, Leonard's brother's van on weekends. We did backyard graduations and small church receptions. We slept 4 hours some nights and ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter. It took 12 years before we stopped worrying every January. When Leonard died, I had a company with 40 employees, a client roster that included 3 Fortune 500 companies, and a 28-year-old son who had just been promoted to junior account manager. I had a mortgage on a house I couldn't imagine living in alone. I had a grief that sat on my chest like something physical. Reed came home. That was the thing about him then. He just came home. He took a week off work and he sat with me. He sorted through Leonard's desk. He took the calls I couldn't make. He drove me to the attorney's office when I couldn't read the words on the papers in front of me. He said, "We're going to be okay, Mom," and I believed him because he said it like Leonard used to say it, not as a promise, but as a fact he was going to make true. I promoted him steadily over those years, not out of sentiment. Reed was good at the work. He had his father's instinct for clients, that ability to make people feel like their event was the most important thing happening in the world. By 2020, he was vice president of operations. By 2022, he was chief operating officer. I'd planned to name him CEO when I stepped back, which I told him I'd do when I turned 65. Jillian arrived in the fall of 2022. Reed brought her to a company dinner, and I remember watching her talk to our biggest client and thinking, she's very good at this. She was 32, a corporate transactions attorney at a firm downtown. She was attentive and polished, and she looked at Reed the way you hope someone will look at your child. The first comment came in February of last year. Small thing. We were reviewing a contract and Reed said, "Mom, you already approved this version. Don't you remember? We talked about it Tuesday." I looked at the document. I didn't remember the conversation. But I had approved it. My signature was right there on the page. I said I must have forgotten. Jillian was at that dinner. She touched Reed's hand and looked at me with a particular expression. Not unkind, careful. Then there was the Henderson account in March. A miscommunication. My assistant had given me the wrong brief. But by the time it was sorted, Reed was telling me gently that maybe I needed to slow down, that the pace was hard on anyone, that I should think about what it would mean to really let go. And Dr. Parrish, our family physician of 4 years, started asking different questions at my checkups. How's your sleep? Any trouble finding words? Do you ever feel confused in familiar places? I told him no. He wrote things down. I hadn't understood what was being built. I did now. I started the car. The house was quiet when I got home. I sat at Leonard's old writing desk in the study and pulled up everything I could find on financial elder abuse and fraudulent succession documents. I read until my eyes burned. Then I called Claudia Merritt. Claudia had handled Belmore's corporate contracts for 9 years. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd seen my name and was curious why I was calling at 7 in the evening. I told her everything: the Cayman account, the Whitfield group, the Monday assessment, the transfer window. She was quiet for a long moment. "Can you get me the succession document?" she asked. "I don't know what form it's in yet. The recording is a start, but we need the paper trail." A pause. "Mavis, if this is what it sounds like, you need someone who can move faster than I can. There's a man I've worked with, retired federal investigator. He's private now." She gave me the name, Frank Shelby. I called him from the car in my own driveway. He answered immediately. Blunt voice. No warm-up. I told him I needed to hire him tonight. He said he'd meet me in 40 minutes. We sat in a corner booth at a diner off Route 9. Frank Shelby was 68, compact and very still, with the kind of stillness that comes from having waited out worse situations than this one. He had a small notebook, no phone on the table. He let me talk without interrupting. When I finished, he asked 2 questions. How long had Trent Briggs been operating as a financial advisor, and did I have any documentation of the Whitfield Group connection? I said I had nothing yet. He said that was fine. "I'll have something for you by tomorrow afternoon," he said. "What are you looking for?" He picked up his coffee. Everything they don't want me to find. I didn't sleep. I lay on top of the covers and looked at the ceiling and thought about Reed saying she'll be comfortable. The placement, Maple Ridge. I knew the name. It was 40 minutes from our house. At 5 in the morning, a text from Frank. Found the Whitfield connection. It's worse than you described. Don't sign anything. Rupert texted at 7. Our VP of Operations, Leonard's hire, 26 years with Belmore. Mavis, wire transfers out of the operating account. 4 months, small amounts. Reed's digital signature on all of them. But something doesn't look right about the IP. I texted back, come to the house at noon, don't talk to anyone. Frank arrived at 1 o'clock. Claudia was already there. Rupert sat at the dining room table with his reading glasses on and his hands flat on the surface, the way he sat when something had genuinely frightened him. Frank opened his briefcase and laid out 3 folders. Start here, he said, and pushed the first one across. Photographs. Trent Briggs shaking hands with a man named Gerard Whitfield outside a building in Midtown. November, February, March. 3 meetings that Jillian had described to Reed as preliminary, just exploratory conversations. Frank had pulled phone records. Trent and Whitfield had been speaking twice a week since October. The Whitfield Group wasn't just a buyer. It was a competitor that had lost 3 major accounts to Belmore in the past 2 years. They didn't want to acquire the company. They wanted to dissolve it, absorb the client list, and eliminate the competition. The $10 million offer was below market by at least $4 million. Once the assets moved offshore, Jillian's firm, where Trent held a silent consulting arrangement, would collect a transaction fee. Trent would keep the rest. I sat with that for a moment. She never loved him, I said. It wasn't a question. I can't say that, Frank said. I can't say she had this plan before they were engaged. The second folder was Rupert's nightmare in printed form. 14 wire transfers over 4 months, ranging from $8,000 to $62,000. Each one authorized with Reed's digital signature, but Frank had obtained the IFP logs. Every single authorization came from a device registered to Jillian's downtown office, not Reed's. She'd had his passwords. She'd had his credentials. She'd signed his name to a 4-month theft, and he hadn't known. Rupert pulled off his reading glasses and set them on the table and didn't say anything. He didn't know, I said. He didn't know about the transfers, Frank said carefully. What he knew about the rest, that's harder to answer. I nodded once and said, show me the third folder. Dr. Parrish. This was the one that made Claudia stand up and walk to the window. Frank had found 2 prior cases, a retired professor in Fairfield County, 2019. A woman named Mrs. Eugenia Crane, 71 years old, a $3.2 million estate. Her nephew had brought concerns to Parrish. Parrish filed a cognitive assessment. The nephew received medical power of attorney. Mrs. Crane was placed in a facility within 4 months. She died there 11 months later. Parrish received $20,000 from the nephew's LLC 2 weeks after filing. The second case, 2021. A widower, former business owner. Same architecture, different names. The man was still alive, but his business had been sold at a deep loss, and the proceeds had vanished into a shell company. 2 complaints to the state medical board, both dismissed for insufficient evidence. Is there a third victim? I asked. There's a third payment, Frank said. He opened to the last page. An email from Trent Briggs to Dr. Parrish. Subject line Monday timeline, 3 weeks prior. 2 sentences. Assessment locks in Monday 8 a.m. Full cooperation needed per our agreement. Below it, a wire confirmation. $15,000 from a Delaware LLC to a personal account in Parrish's name. The room was very quiet. I looked around the table. Rupert, who had given 26 years to something Leonard had started. Claudia, who had protected this company through 2 recessions and a lawsuit we almost didn't survive. Frank, who had driven 40 minutes on a Saturday night for a woman he'd never met. If I do this at the reception, I said, Reed's wedding ends in handcuffs. Nobody spoke for a moment. His wedding, Frank said, is already a crime. You're just naming it out loud. The rehearsal dinner was at Hartwell that evening. I sat at the head table and watched Jillian make toasts and squeeze Reed's hand and laugh easily at things guests said. She was very good. I'll say that plainly. She was very, very good. At 9:30, Trent found me by the bar. Warm, fraternal, the kind of man who calls older women by their first names immediately, as if he's always known them. Mavis, big day tomorrow. You hanging in there? I'm wonderful, I said. He looked at me with that careful, assessing look, the same one Jillian used. We just want to take care of you. You've worked so hard for so long. I know you do, I said and smiled and walked away. I didn't sleep that night either. I lay in the dark and listened to the house and thought about Reed at 7 years old, carrying a stack of napkin samples across our living room floor because we had a big event the next morning and had run out of table space. He'd been so careful with them, so serious, afraid to drop them. He'd always been careful. That was the thing about him that had always mattered most. Saturday came in clear and warm October sky, a flat, bright blue. I wore a sage green dress and Leonard's watch on my wrist. I had my speech in my jacket pocket, the real one, not the version I'd written 3 weeks ago before I understood what this wedding actually was. The ceremony was held in Hartwell's garden. 220 guests. When the processional began and Reed walked out to the altar, he looked at me first, just for a moment, and there was something in his face. Not guilt exactly. Something closer to longing, like he missed me and didn't know why, standing 12 feet away. Jillian came down the aisle, and he turned to her, and it was gone. The vows were beautiful. I sat in the front row and let them be beautiful. I owed him that much. The reception moved inside. The band played. The first dance was a song I didn't recognize, something slow and current, and I watched them turn in the center of the floor and felt such a complicated grief that I pressed my hand once against my collarbone just to feel something solid. At 8:15, the MC announced the mother of the groom toast. I took the microphone. I looked out at 220 faces, people I'd known for decades, clients, vendors, friends of Leonard's who had become my own. Rupert at table 7, his hands folded in front of him. Claudia at table 12, her face completely composed. Frank near the back door, standing. Leonard and I started our company in the spare bedroom of a house we could barely afford, I said. For years, Reed's bedtime stories were client proposals and vendor contracts, because that's what I was reading when I came in to say goodnight. Some laughter from the crowd. Reed smiled from the sweetheart table. He grew up watching us build something, and then he joined us, and he was better at it than we had any right to expect. He made Belmore something his father would have been proud of. I paused. I want to say that clearly, because the next part is hard, and I need him to know that nothing I'm about to share changes that truth. The room shifted. The sound went different. I nodded to Frank. The screen dropped behind me. Trent's photograph appeared first. Him and Gerard Whitfield, 3 separate dates, the same handshake repeated across months. The Whitfield Group, I said, is not a buyer. They are a competitor who lost 3 major accounts to Belmore in the past 2 years. This acquisition was never an offer. It was a dismantling, and it was arranged by 2 people Reed trusted completely. The room erupted. I raised one hand and waited. At midnight tonight, a document I was meant to sign at this reception would have transferred everything, this company, Leonard's Trust, $10 million, into an offshore account. It would have been gone by morning. Gone before I woke up Sunday. Jillian stood. Mavis, you need to stop. Sit down, Jillian. Something in my voice settled the room. She sat. I moved through it piece by piece. The wire transfers from Belmore's operating account, authorized from Jillian's office device on Reed's credentials. The LLC structure. The Whitfield sale price, $4 million below market. Each number on the screen, each date, each transaction. When I reached Dr. Parrish, I heard him stand from table 9. Frank stepped forward before he took a second step. The detective beside Frank stood up. Parrish sat back down without a word. I showed Mrs. Crane's case, the widower's case, the email from Trent to Parrish with its 2 flat sentences about Monday, the wire transfer receipt with Parrish's name at the receiving end. He was going to file an assessment Monday morning declaring me cognitively impaired. The medical power, attorney clause buried in the succession document, would have triggered automatically. I never would have seen it coming. I trusted him completely. 5 years, completely. I looked at Reed. He had gone very still. He'd been still since the first photograph appeared, staring at the screen with the expression of a man watching something collapse that he had believed was solid ground. "Reed," I said, and the microphone carried it. "I know you didn't authorize those transfers. I know she had your passwords and your credentials and your trust. I know she spent 2 years telling you I was slipping, that this was how you protected me, that you were finally doing something that mattered." His jaw moved. "I also know," I said, "that part of you chose to believe her, not because you're dishonest, because I made it easy to believe. I ran this company like a closed system. I made decisions without you and handed you the outcomes. I told you you'd earned everything, and then kept my hand on every lever. I was so afraid of losing what Leonard and I built that I never let you feel like you owned any of it." I stopped. "That's on me, and I'm sorry for it, truly." Reed stood up. I watched him. Jillian was already reaching for his arm, already forming the sentence that would redirect this, that would tell him what he was seeing wasn't what it looked like. She'd done it 100 times across 2 years. I had watched her do it without understanding what I was watching. He stepped back from her hand. "Don't," he said, 1 word. Then he looked at me. "Tell me the rest of it." I finished. At the word midnight, the screen behind me switched to a single red line. Transfer blocked. Court order in effect. Claudia had filed it sealed at 11 the night before. The judge had signed it at midnight. Both detectives stood. A third appeared from near the kitchen corridor. Jillian looked at the exit. Frank was already at the door. Trent made it 4 steps toward the back of the tent before the second detective reached him. He didn't fight. He just stopped walking and let it happen, like a man who'd understood somewhere in the past few minutes that the accounting had come due. Dr. Parrish didn't move. He sat at table 9 with his hands on his knees and stared at the floor, and he waited. I stepped down from the podium. Reed was standing in the middle of the reception floor, alone. Still wearing his boutonniere, the flower wilted from the long day. 200 guests sat around him in silence. He looked like a man standing in a room whose walls had just been quietly removed. I walked to him and I put my hand on his arm. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, "How long did you know?" 48 hours. He closed his eyes. "I should have come to you first," I said, "even knowing what I knew." "No." He opened his eyes. "If you'd come to me, Jillian would have talked me out of it. She was very good at that." He said it in the past tense, and I heard everything in that tense. The decision already made, quietly, somewhere in the last 20 minutes. I needed to see it, the way I just saw it. He looked at the dark screen. "Dad's trust," he said. "Safe." "The company." Standing, Rupert filed the protection order Thursday night. Something moved across his face, quieter than relief, something that comes after it. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said. "She made me feel like taking care of you was the one thing I could do that would actually matter, and I wanted it to matter so much that I stopped asking the right questions." He looked at me. "I stopped asking you." I thought about what I'd said at the podium, about the distance I'd built without knowing I was building it. "We'll figure out what it means," I said. "Not tonight, but we will." Jillian was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse, and breach of fiduciary duty. Her brother Trent faced wire fraud, conspiracy, and operating an unlicensed financial scheme. Dr. Parrish's license was revoked within 60 days. The state medical board moved fast, probably because 3 additional former patients came forward within 2 weeks of the reception. He filed for bankruptcy before the civil cases even reached court. The Whitfield Group deal died before it ever became public. Belmore Event Design closed the following quarter at its highest revenue in 6 years. We hired an external CFO. We implemented dual authorization requirements on every transaction above $1,000 and added 2 independent board members. The Henderson account came back, so did 2 others we'd lost during the months when Reed's detraction and Jillian's quiet interference had made us look unreliable inside puzzle. I underwent an independent cognitive evaluation in January. 2 days at Yale with a neurologist named Dr. Adler, who asked me careful questions and gave me careful tasks. His written report concluded that my executive function and decision-making capacity were in the top percentile for my age group. I thanked him and drove home and sat in Leonard's chair and cried for an hour, and I wasn't entirely sure why. Relief, probably, and something lonelier than relief. Reed didn't come home right away. He took short-term rental in Norwalk, and he called every few days. Short calls at first, careful ones, both of us measuring each sentence before we said it. But they got longer. In November, we talked for an hour about his father. Things Reed had never said to me directly, how he'd been angry at Leonard for dying, how he'd buried it, because you can't be angry at someone for dying, and how Jillian had found that buried thing somehow and used it. He didn't say she'd exploited him. He said she'd given him permission to feel something he'd been ashamed of, and he'd followed right off a cliff. I told him I'd been angry at Leonard, too, for leaving the company to me alone, for leaving in general, for building something beautiful with me, and then not being there to protect it. Long pause. "You never told me that," Reed said. "No," I said, "I didn't." The calls got longer after that. In February, he asked if he could come back. Not as COO, he didn't reach for that. He asked if there was a client management role, something he could rebuild, something he could earn. I said yes. On his first day, I came in early and left coffee on his desk. Leonard's mug, the blue ceramic one that had lived in the office kitchen since 1998. I set it there and went to my own office and opened my calendar and started my day. An hour later, Reed appeared in my doorway. He was holding the mug with both hands. He looked at it, and then he looked at me, and he didn't say anything. I didn't say anything either. But he came in and sat down across from me, and we went over the Henderson account together. And outside the window, the February light was thin and cold, and everything between us was still fragile and unfinished and tender in the way that things are when they are genuinely new. Not restored, not returned to what they were, but turned into something we were going to have to build here, the two of us, without a blueprint. Which, when I thought about it, was exactly how Leonard and I had started.